The Vietnam War, Power, Pride and the Cost of Illusion. The Vietnam War did not begin as a mistake. It began as a belief. A belief that history could be controlled. A belief that ideology justified sacrifice. And a belief that power, once applied, could not be questioned. What followed was not merely a war, but a tragedy, one shaped by fear, pride, miscalculation and political ambition. A war that reshaped Vietnam forever, fractured American society, and left scars that still echo across generations. This was not simply a conflict between communism and capitalism. It was a war of independence, identity and survival, misunderstood, mismanaged, and prolonged far beyond reason. Origins: a nation that would not submit. Vietnam's history is defined by resistance. For over 1,000 years, the Vietnamese people resisted foreign domination, first from China, later from European empires. Each invasion was met with rebellion. Each occupier faced the same truth: Vietnam would not submit quietly. In 1858, France invaded Vietnam and absorbed it into French Indochina. French officials claimed they were bringing civilization, roads, railways, education, and Christianity, but beneath this facade lay exploitation. Land was seized, resources were extracted, Vietnamese labor was abused, political dissent was crushed. Nationalism grew in the shadows. Among those shaped by colonial injustice was a young revolutionary named Nguyen Sinh Khanh, later known to the world as Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh, nationalist before communist. Ho Chi Minh's life was defined by exile and persistence. In 1911, he left Vietnam, traveling the world as a laborer, sailor, and activist. He lived in France, Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union. Wherever he went, he studied the mechanics of power and empire. In 1919, inspired by President Woodrow Wilson's rhetoric on self-determination, Ho Chi Minh submitted a petition at the Paris Peace Conference asking for Vietnamese independence. He was ignored. Disillusioned, he turned to Marxism-Leninism, not out of blind ideology, but because it promised liberation from colonial rule. Communism became a tool, not the destination. For Ho Chi Minh, independence came first. World War II, a brief window of hope. When World War II erupted, France fell to Nazi Germany, Japan occupied Vietnam, French colonial authority collapsed. In the chaos, Ho Chi Minh returned home and formed the Viet Minh, a nationalist resistance movement. Their goal was simple: expel the Japanese and prevent the return of colonial rule. Ironically, the United States supported them. The OSS, precursor to the CIA, armed, trained, and coordinated with Ho Chi Minh's forces. American officers admired their discipline and resolve. Ho Chi Minh, in turn, praised America as a symbol of freedom. In September 1945, following Japan's surrender, Ho Chi Minh declared Vietnam an independent nation, quoting directly from the American Declaration of Independence. For a brief moment, history could have taken a different path. The Cold War rewrites the script. But global politics intervened. Franklin Roosevelt, who opposed colonialism, was dead. Harry Truman now faced an expanding Soviet Union. France demanded its colonies back. It warned Washington, support Vietnamese independence and France might align with Moscow. The Cold War logic prevailed. America backed France. Thus began the First Indochina War. For nearly a decade, French forces battled the Viet Minh and lost. Guerrilla warfare, local support, and relentless determination wore down French morale. The war culminated in 1954 at D-1 EC7 NB and PH1 E7, a catastrophic French defeat that shocked the world. France withdrew. Vietnam was divided. A divided nation, an inevitable. At the Geneva Accords, Vietnam was split at the 17th parallel. North Vietnam led by Ho Chi Minh. South Vietnam backed by the United States. Elections were promised, they never happened. American officials feared Ho Chi Minh would win overwhelmingly. In the South, Ngo Dinh Diem was installed as president. He ruled through nepotism, corruption and repression, favoring Catholics in a largely Buddhist nation. Opposition grew, resistance hardened. In the countryside, communist insurgents, later known as the Viet Cong, organized, recruited, and prepared for war. America steps in. By the early 1960s, Cold War anxieties dominated Washington. President John F. Kennedy believed losing Vietnam would signal weakness, yet he hesitated to deploy full combat forces. Instead, he sent advisors, special forces, helicopters, and equipment, quietly escalating America's role. Napalm burned forests. Agent Orange poisoned land and people. The war was already expanding. After Kennedy's assassination, Lyndon B. Johnson inherited Vietnam and chose escalation over retreat. The Gulf of Tonkin incident provided the excuse. Congress granted Johnson near-total authority. The war exploded. The American War. By 1968, over 500,000 American troops were deployed. But Vietnam was not a conventional battlefield. The enemy was unseen. The jungle swallowed armies. Booby traps, ambushes, and tunnels turned every step into a threat. Battles were won yet meant nothing. Villages were taken, abandoned, and retaken. Body counts replaced strategy. Success was measured in numbers, not outcomes. At home, the public was told victory was near. Then came Tet Offensive, the turning point. In January 1968, during the Tet holiday, Communist forces launched a nationwide assault. Militarily, they were defeated. Politically, America lost the war. Television showed chaos, fighting in cities, even inside the U.S. Embassy compound. The contradiction between government promises and reality shattered trust. Protests erupted. Johnson withdrew from politics. America fractured. Withdrawal and collapse. Richard Nixon promised peace with honor. Instead, he prolonged the war through bombing and expansion into Laos and Cambodia. Eventually, under mounting pressure, America withdrew. In 1973, U.S. forces left Vietnam. 2 years later, Saigon fell. Helicopters lifted the last Americans from rooftops as desperate allies were left behind. The war was over. Aftermath, victory without peace. Vietnam was unified but devastated. Millions were dead. Millions more displaced. Communist economic policies led to collapse and famine. Over 1.5 million people fled, many by sea. America gained no victory, only questions. Questions about morality, about power, about the cost of pride. Final reflection. The Vietnam War was not lost on the battlefield. It was lost in the belief that force could replace understanding, that ideology justified endless sacrifice, and that retreat was worse than destruction. It was not a soldier's war. It was a political war. And for both Vietnam and the United States, nothing would ever be the same again.